Do it on time this time?
We'll find out. If we go live in a minute, we'll find out, guys. Shane, I'm waiting for you. We are live. Everyone's here. Sorry, guys, for the delay. In traditional fashion, we're 3 minutes late, but for us, I think that's a bit of an achievement, if I'm honest. So,
well, in our defense, we are showing progress.
It's true. We're getting better. Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of HR Leaders Live, the show where we discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. As always, my name's Chris Rainey, co-founder of HRD Leaders and host of the HR Leaders podcast. On today's show, we're going to be talking about how to build your analytics function. Before we get started, let me introduce my co-host, Matt Burns, Chief HR Officer over at Yusk. How are you doing, Matt?
Doing well. Yourself?
I'm good, thanks. You probably noticed that Jill's not with us today. Unfortunately, I say fortunately, she has a date with her children, so she's busy being a mum today, but she'll be back next week.
Fortunate for them, unfortunate for us.
Yeah. That means we have 2 special guests this week. I'm really excited to be joined by Anthony Oland, Senior Vice President and Global Talent Lead at WPP, and Davide Cervellin. I'm sorry, Davide, I probably pronounced that really badly. Director of Analytics EMEA over at PayPal. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
Thank you very much. How are you?
Good, thank you. Well, look, let's jump straight in. I want to start with yourself, Davide, because I'm very excited to hear your thoughts. I suppose let's start with the obvious question of, how to build your analytics function. If we're an organization building our analytics function, where do we start?
Well, it's a very broad question, Chris, and I'll try to tackle it in a few minutes. So, and it's a question that I get asked quite a lot because I have the privilege of working for a company that is digital in nature. And so nobody really is asking the question, what is the value of analytics? Where do we put analytics? We just exist as a fundamental component of how company makes decisions. So, but if a company, doesn't have that privilege and they came from a world in which analytics was not part of their DNA, they have to think about fundamental questions like, what kind of person do I need? Where do I put them in the organization? What can I expect them to deliver? And these questions are pretty fundamental. And I speak to a lot of HR leaders about, what that means for their organization. To keep this very high level in the context of this call and make a point that probably resonates with many listeners, I guess we can say the best place where to put the analytics function usually is outside of the business and in a central function. So that's why you hear things like a chief data officer, reporting to the CEO, because they directly report to the CEO. They are the voice of the truth. Right. And therefore, they allow the CEO to have an oversight on all numbers, all models, all forecasts, these things that really help understand where to steer the business and what is happening when I deploy my resources and what reasonably I can expect back for the investments that I make. That's probably one option. The other option, which is actually the option that I have at PayPal, is under the CFO. Right. If you don't want to have a chief data officer directly reporting to the CEO, the CFO is a good place to be because, first of all, the CFO is the person with the wallet, which is a very nice escalation path when needed. And also because finance in nature is a service function that sides the business. In the case of PayPal, there was a decision made by CFO Bob Swan when he joined in 2005. He essentially said every business unit must have a finance counterpart and an analytics counterpart, and analytics sits under finance. And our job is really to help make database decisions and make sure that, there is deterministic expectations about what the return of a specific investment may be. Now, again, traditional companies may face the decision about where do I start in hiring, in setting up the function. My best suggestion is hire from the top, so hire the leader, and make sure that you have a very frank conversations with the leader during the recruiting process about what they can and cannot do. When I go to interviews myself or even just consult companies, I say, okay, so if I was to take this job, right, this is what I would like to do. And oftentimes they tell me, but you can't. And so, then you face a problem about, am I going to actually succeed? Am I clear in what things the company wants me to deliver? And are they clear on the leeway they need to give me for me to deliver those things? So it's a conversation that needs to happen, very frankly, in the recruiting phase, absolutely. And then this leader must, hire the organization underneath him. Most likely, tell you the truth, the reality is there are a lot of analysts already in your company. I'm sure of that, because numbers are already trickling down in functions like supply chain, logistics, sales, marketing. So the reality is the exercise at the very beginning is about understanding where these people sit and put them together in an organic function, which gives them, again, from an HR perspective, gives them a lot of opportunities to grow. Because if I'm an analyst sitting in marketing, guess what? I don't want to be a marketeer. So what career can I have? Not much. And therefore I leave. But if I enter an analytics function, with an analytics leader and different level of seniority, then I can grow within that function. I can learn new things. I can learn things that are relevant to me. And it's easier for a leader to retain talent and also attract a new talent. The last thing that I'm going to say is when you hire the leader, right, the leader tends to feel alone because he's the only one doing this. And the nature of an analytics function is that an analyst in an analytics function looks into the numbers of everyone else. And so unless you have a very strong endorsement from the top, this is a very lonely and gradeless job. So you need to make sure that you have CEO backing. And what I try to speak about as much as I can is I also think that it's time for companies to understand that there should be an analytics person also in the board, especially for public companies. Because this person can help manage expectations about what analytics can do for the company in the short term and in the long term, and can also act as a counterpart to the chief data officer or analytics lead, actively working with the board and with the CEO, helping them understand the long-term value. Because the reality is, if you look at analytics as a function, it's a pure cost, right? It's a cost. You have people and then you have tools, and that's a cost, and you don't see revenue, right? But, the experience of people that have done this, like me, for a very long time, is we can prove the value, right? We can definitely show the difference between database decision-making, the advantage of learning every time that you make a mistake instead of making the same mistake over and over again. So I say that there should be a duo. There shouldn't be a one-person, one-man band kind of situation to begin with, but there should be a data-savvy person, which could be either a new board member or one of the board members who takes up this responsibility of coaching, the leader, and then the leader itself. One big caveat, be very, very careful, because a lot of people call themselves data experts at all levels, but not everyone really is, because it's a very sexy job title to have today. And so you need to make sure that you have the right conversations during the recruiting process to identify the difference between, a charlatan and someone who actually knows what he's doing and would come in with ideas and a plan and, the drive and the passion, mixing, soft skills, so the capacity of explaining what they're doing, and hardcore skills, which you need if you want to lead a team of extremely technical and talented people.
So, Davide, what does your team setup look like at PayPal?
So we have a mix. I lead a mix of business analysts and data scientists. All right. So the business analyst type of person is a person who looks at the numbers usually backwards. So you look at what happened and you find the reason why a number looks the way it looks, right? And so, for example, we're missing revenue, and if we're missing revenue, you want to know why. When you have a global business with a plethora of products with several channels and several points where you could be missing revenue, you need to have the right level of people and tools to be able to find the problem quickly, and then the analyst usually adds the value of explaining why the numbers are the way they are. Data scientists, on the other hand, do a slightly different job. They tend to look forward. So the data scientist tends to build models based on past information, based on external inputs, based on other relevant information to try and predict what's going to happen. And when I say predict, it really means everything. It could be a prediction of our financial performance, which is very important for a publicly traded company like us. We need to be accurate. We need to tell our CEO with precision what we're going to deliver so that he can manage expectations of the analysts on the street. But it could even be, prediction model for churn. Like, is that customer going to lose interest in PayPal? Is that customer going to use us less? Because if we see that before it happens, we can do something about it. Once you lose interest, it's very difficult to gain, to become relevant again, and therefore, or either difficult or very expensive. So we want to avoid these things. And, these models that the data scientists build are about understanding things before they happen, looking at soft signals, weak signals that essentially give us an indication, and they give us a roadmap and an action plan that we can execute to prevent the problems.
Perfect. Anthony, I'll be interested to get your thoughts on this, because you're in an interesting place where you're working for part of WPP, which focuses on data and analytics, right? So you're kind of getting an inside look to how you're working with customers on this side. How have you seen, or what have you taken away from that you could use in HR?
Well, I think everything that Davide said resonates. So I've helped to hire a chief analytics officer to build out a global analytics practice. We had data. We're in the data business, but to Davide's point, having the data and not understanding how to mesh it together and segment it back out, depending upon what view you're trying to understand, is kind of irrelevant. You need the analytic tools and the analytic insights. And there's the look back that Davide talked about. And HR is great at saying, here's the trend analysis, right? Here's why people have left the organization. Here's how many people have left the organization. Here's how many people we've hired. But when you talk about the predictive side that Davide points to, that's really where the CFO and the CEO want to have the conversation. If you walk in and you say, turnover is high this year, but the CFO has just met with the CEO and said, revenue and profits are high this year, but your point doesn't resonate. If you can talk about how that trend is going to have an impact on top line revenue or on profitability, then suddenly you have a conversation. But that takes very sophisticated insights. As Davide can get to when we get back to him, there are people who do basic modeling, kind of moving the data around to make it in a viewable form. And then there's very sophisticated analytics on the predictive side and attribution. And so I've been fortunate in the past 4 years of working with data and analytics people in our world-class offering to clients and bringing that into the HR function. Because as I've said, HR holds a lot of data. We've historically acted as data gatekeepers. You're not able to take that and portray it into a story or an inevitability for your leadership team, then the data is useless.
Yeah. Matt?
I've just been furiously taking notes for the last 5 minutes. Got like 5 post-it notes here in front of me. There's just so much good stuff. I would say the first thing that stands out to me, just what Davide mentioned a moment ago, is the idea of organizational design with respect to the data function and where it sits in the organization. I think it's absolutely critical. One thing I always say to people that ask me about org design is you can tell a lot about what a company thinks of a function and where they put it. So if you have data stashed 5 layers from the CEO in a very small team, you can tell that it's not a strategic function of the organization. When you have a chief data officer that's on par with your CFO and your CHRO and your CMO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's a strategic driver of that business. And for a data team and for people that are in the data business, that's the kind of comfort you want, knowing that your skills are going to be recognized and appreciated within that organization. I think on the second point piece, I'm always interested from data from a cultural perspective. And I talk a lot about the philosophy of how you use data, and I haven't heard it mentioned yet, but I think it's worth mentioning to kind of our audience, which is, how you actually take the information and what you do with it and what kind of the thresholds are with respect to how you apply it, I think are absolutely critical. One thing we've tested here in our organization is we've actually decoupled accountability from the data process. So we have a 76-point HR scorecard that measures everything from turnover and wages and satisfaction on learning courses. And we've simply said to the business, none of these unique data points can be used as an impetus to drive corrective action. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to remove any linkage between corrective action and the data process, because we wanted data to be a conversation. And what we're not focusing on is the number. I mean, the number is a lag result. That is the result of a number of actions that preceded it, and inherently things like turnover or items like that are impacted by not only internal factors but also macroeconomic factors. So for us to say that a number in a cell on a spreadsheet or in Power BI or in Tableau, whatever platform you use to demonstrate your data, to suggest that in and of itself, that you can isolate a problem with one number, I think is a fallacy. So what we've done is remove that corrective action impetus, and we can actually have a productive conversation with the stakeholders to identify root causes and actually fix the issue going forward, which ultimately is really what we should be doing. So whether you're looking at data from a reactive perspective and scorecarding it and then taking action against it, which I think a lot of companies are doing today, or as our guests have mentioned, flipping it around and going predictive with it, I think removing that disciplinary stigma to the data really creates that partnership you need in the organization, and removes any of the concerns that you have around recency and accuracy. I've been in roles before we've managed data, and I spend most of the time managing politics because people are managing the perceptions created by a scorecard or a dashboard. And I've just found here that that's not the work we want to be doing. What we want to be doing is actually fixing the problems. So we've just taken that stigma away to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So how do you think HR? Obviously, a lot of people are saying now, the future organizations will have that chief data officer will be on the board. How does HR work into that equation? Because now HR, I'm seeing every day on LinkedIn, there's a new job posting for a data, head of workforce analytics, head of HR analytics. There's about 1,000 different names for it, as we all know. How do you think the relationship with the chief data officer fits in with HR?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to add my 2 cents. I think it's critical. I think as business goes forward, I think we need to move away from silos. Period. And particularly for a new function like data that may not be understood by all the functions to its full capacity yet, I think all the more reason to align up front. So, as an HR professional, the strongest partnerships I have are with my senior members of my team, whether it's the CFO, the CIO, the CMO, and now in this case, the CDO. Those are critical partnerships that I need to enable my team to help enable the organization. And I heard the term previously mentioned, service functions. And that really is what all these functions we're talking about do in the organization. We're all overhead. We all, for the most part, don't drive any revenue. But what we're unified in is our desire to help support the organization and help them drive top line revenue and also bottom line results. So I think for that alignment, we need to have our activities align and be complementary if we're going to achieve that result, as opposed to each working on our own little mandates and potentially working against each other. So I think to answer your question more directly, I think that relationship is absolutely critical, both in terms of having that alignment, but also in the ongoing skills building. We spend a lot of time with our team teaching them how to analyze data, how to go through the information, how to tell the story. Because I think, I also heard earlier, there's a lot of charlatans out there that think that they understand data because they can pick a number off on a spreadsheet and come up with an opinion. That's not analysis. That is just simply throwing darts at a dartboard. So I think organizations not only have an obligation to stand up a data function, but also educate the people within the organization on the appropriate use of the data and how to analyze it, because there's so much value that can be derived if you know how to leverage it properly.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, what have you learned from working in the division of Wunderman? Obviously you're working in the division where it's all around analytics and data. What have you learned from that you've adopted within your HR function?
Well, I think for us, it's been very much about, it's not, to Matt's point, it's not about reporting. It's about being able to find solutions within the data. And I think historically, HR environments that I've worked in, connect with peers on, have been about reporting. Right? Here's what we know from the data. Here's what we can tell you about what's happened in the past. But we're not sophisticated enough as HR practitioners to be able to then turn it into something that's actionable, which is why, Matt and Davide and I are fortunate enough to work in environments where we already have data and analytics people outside the HR function. And so it's easier to then impress upon your leadership the importance of analytics. And in my case, we actually sell analytic services to clients very profitably. So we hire in very talented people. I'm able to then connect with them and be able to bring the tools and the capabilities back into the conversation as we build out our HR function. I think Davide touched on it early. If you don't have those people within your environment the way that we do, find them within your network and go and ask them about the capabilities and the tools that are out there today. Because if, to Matt's point, if you're just picking numbers off a spreadsheet and saying, ooh, this looks high, you're not sure if it's going to continue to grow, and you're not really sure what you're supposed to do in order to vary the growth of that number. I think having the complexity, and Matt talked about all the different data points, having the complexity of more and more and more data each day is a benefit. It's also intellectually overwhelming if you're not a Davide, right? If you don't live in this world and get excited about this.
Yeah, that's me basically.
Yeah, you get paralyzed when I start to think about the amount of data that we collect on our businesses and on our employees. But fortunately, there are very smart people out there like Matt and Davide who understand the capability of data. That's really where the conversation needs to start. What is the capability of data? And then build out your teams from there.
Perfect. I think you hit on a good point as well. Is well, first and foremost, I've interviewed over 50 HR leaders over the last 6 months, and I would say 99% of them who have analytics teams have taken their talent from finance, from marketing, from other areas of the business, who already understand the organizations to some extent, and brought them within HR. And the guys like Shell, like Microsoft, like Facebook, all came from their finance departments, from the marketing departments. I actually can't name a HR generalist that's actually transitioned the other way. I think it'll be very, very difficult. I know you've done a lot of work, Matt, on in terms of putting your system in place. Matt, you've muted yourself, by the way. I know you've done a lot of work there, Matt, but many HR leaders, it'll be very difficult for them to go the other way around. and because traditionally, as we all know, HR is not a data-driven analytical function. It's just not. And the other thing which I was hoping to get your feedback on is, the problem is when they do have the data, then they don't understand how to sell it or how to tell the story in a language which the rest of the business can understand. And that's a whole nother barrier, which I think is holding a lot of organizations back. Davide, could you share any advice in terms of how to present analytics to, obviously you're reporting directly into the CEO of the business. Any advice there?
Yeah, so I mean, this is another one of the classic questions that I get, right? And the reality is, you need a combination of both. So when you have a team of analysts, you cannot have everyone that is socially savvy, let's say, that is capable of going from a data set into a fully understandable story, right? Not everyone has that end-to-end talent. People tend to skew either one way or the other, right? And, the problem is, the opportunity really is, as a manager, is that you need both. So you need the technical person who really wants to just do their job, who are, they thrive into solving complex problems. They are excited by the challenge that you give them. And all they want is to craft a beautiful solution. Right? They don't want to deal with people. They don't want to, interact with other people that often, right? And then on the other side, you have people who, need to be able, if you want your team to plug into the organization and to deploy useful strategies, because that's the end game of analytics, is not the number. It's the action that the number is going to inform, right? So if you want to convince someone who has been doing their job for 20 years without looking at the numbers that they need to listen to you, you need social skills. You need influencing skills. You need negotiation skills. You need to be able to put yourself in their shoes. You need to be able to understand what they need. And you need to be able to connect what you have to say with them achieving their goals, which is, what I just said is called sales. It's not called analytics, but it's a critical skill, right? If you want to be a successful analyst, especially if you want to be senior in a large organization, you need to develop these skills. You need to trim them. You need to make sure that your spear is very sharp, because that's how you deploy the beautiful work that the technical people do. If you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to explain the meaning of what you do. It's very, very difficult to inform the strategy of your company. And it's very, very difficult to have people, like you mentioned, that go from analytics into some other business functions, which happens quite often, because once you understand the numbers behind the business, you can actually be the business guy yourself, right? And that's the core of it. So I believe you need both, but I believe you need a healthy mix of both. Not that every analyst should have both, because it is impossible. Some analysts don't have it in them, and you shouldn't try and put it in them, because they're very, very good at what they do overall. So my advice is, when you hire an analyst as an HR person, especially in the screening process, you have to have clarity whether the hiring manager wants to have one or the other, because the kind of questions and the kind of answers that you should expect are completely different. In one case, what I like to ask to analysts that I believe should have a sufficient level of autonomy, my interviews are entirely based on soft skills. I don't ask any technical skills. I have a quiz for that part. They have to code something, and if that's acceptable, tick. But to me, it's about, tell me about the time that you convinced someone that they were wrong. And, what was the challenge? Or tell me, about some time in which I had to deal with conflict. Because guess what? Most of the time, I'm telling people that they're wrong. And that's, that's the worst job description ever, right? And I have to do it in a way in which I maintain healthy relationships. Because I want these guys to come back to me tomorrow with another cool question, asking me for advice, asking me for a business case to back them up once again. So it has to be, a combination of hard skills as a manager, because I need to manage technical people, which means I need to understand them. And the reason why I can do that is because I've been an analyst myself. And this is one of the flags that I would put. If you're hiring an analytics leader, make sure they got at some point in their life their hands very, very, very dirty, because otherwise they're not going to be able to inspire the technical guys. They're not. It doesn't work. You need to be technical if you want to deal with technical people. There's no escape. But also, like I said, a healthy, soft skills. How do you position yourself? How you deal with conflict? How you deal with, telling someone bad news about the business, of course, and so on. So you need to have clarity as an HR person, because then you are able to support your hiring manager in a much more efficient way, filtering out the people that don't fit with the need that they may have in that particular moment.
Very interesting. I actually noticed that when we launched our HR Analytics virtual series, we have 50 vice presidents of HR Analytics that join us every single month for a workshop. And the first thing I realized is most of them aren't actually technical. But they were hired in that position because they can sell it to the rest of the business and communicate the strategy. So when I did the podcast and I asked some more technical questions, I realized they actually perhaps weren't the right person to give me the answer, and they would refer back to their team and then come back to me with a response, which I found quite strange at the time. But now, based on what you just said, it makes complete sense, because if you stick a very highly technical person in a boardroom and they're having to explain the strategy and to the whole business, I'm sure that's going to be very difficult as well. So very, very interesting. Anyone have any other points on that?
Yeah, so what I would say is, coming from the non-technical side of the equation, right? The storytelling, the negotiating, the selling, I'm strong there, but I have zero technical skills, right? So to Davide's point, when I work with our analytics team, I don't know how to use these data visualization tools like Tableau or Exponum, so I bring them in with me. And Chris, I think that's the point you're touching on, where if you're taking a handoff from your analytics strength and carrying it as a message to a leadership team, but you can't back into the data, you can't talk about how you got there, what tools you were able to use to come up with these insights, you have to continue to go back. And after a while, you start to lose credibility. So bring those people into the meeting with you. And data and analytics is being talked about so prevalently in every conversation that to say, I need my analytics team to come in with me to help to really reinforce this story, I don't think you're going to be shunned for that as an HR leader. I think you'll actually be applauded for bringing the subject matter expert.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just add a couple things around some of the points mentioned. The first thing is, I was actually having a chat yesterday with a number of HR leaders here in Vancouver at a CPHR, which is our professional association for human resources groups. And we had a great discussion around technology and data yesterday. And one question that came up was in regards to just this, which is kind of what the profile is of the ideal HR analytics professional. I think it's a not so well-known secret that a lot of HR people are kind of in over their heads when it comes to data. and just maybe a bit nervous or shy to put their hand up and say, I don't actually know what to do with this, but there's an expectation from my business that I'm going to add value here. And I would just say to those folks, don't get too daunted by the skills that you perceive that you may or may not have. I think some of the competencies that we've talked about here are skills that exist with HR professionals today, whether those skills be synthesizing large amounts of information and making the complex really, really simple. That's critical when it comes to analysis, because you're dealing with streams and streams and streams of inputs and data and different considerations. How do you take that macro and then make it into a nice little small piece that you can spread around the organization? We talked about sales. You're not going to walk into a sales meeting with, a stack that's this thick and hope they get a deal. You have to come in with a quick, short message, and that's how you synthesize information. And secondly, one thing I've found does a really good job, especially in the companies I've worked for, is that idea of storytelling. It's how do you take something that's very, very technical and then add a business slant to it, whether it's linking it to the business results, whether it's driving it for company's culture. How do you correlate those two things together so that people in your business who may not be comfortable with data in a day-to-day fashion can understand it in the context of what they do understand? I kind of liken storytelling to, when you give your dog those pills when they're sick, you put it in their food, you mix it in so you can't see it. It's kind of the same idea. You put the data in and you just kind of push it in, and then hopefully at that point in time, people go, oh, I'm an analysis. But in terms of the competencies, I think the idea of synthesis, the idea of storytelling, and the other piece that I would say, and we've gone through a process ourselves recently trying to hire somebody in this role. Curiosity to me is critical. Like, you can't stop. You have to keep asking questions, keep asking questions, keep asking questions. If you start the process with an answer in mind, you're not doing analysis. You're treasure hunting. So you have to be willing to get to a point and say, I may not be finished yet. I have to go out and find other things. And then you need a leadership group that's going to rein people in if they're getting into analysis paralysis. But for me, if I'm going to choose one or the other, I will always choose an analyst who has that natural curiosity, because oftentimes it's that first and second layer, once you get past that, where the real findings are quite exciting.
Well, one thing we've learned with HR is that the job's completely changed in the last 5 to 10 years. When I started, it was the word strategy in HR. It sounds horrible to say, wasn't even in the same conversation. It was very administrative when I was 17 years old, 10 years ago. So to see HR where it is now, we've seen every department. We've seen finance go digital. We've seen marketing. We've seen sales. All of those lines are all driven by data, right? Now it's HR's turn. And it seems like it's long overdue to happen. And I am seeing HR leaders all over the world scurry to be prepared. It's quite funny because I spend my entire day having conversations that way. And the good news is I can tell you that many are embracing the change and they're really excited about it. And they understand that they may not necessarily be the right people to deliver it, but they're actually making sure that their team's prepared and they're bringing in that talent from the rest of the organizations. I suppose the broad question as well is, for you, Anthony, how do you see technology impacting HR over the next sort of 5 years? What do you think the impact's going to be?
I think outside the organization, there's a lot of conversation around how technology, especially machine learning, will be all affecting the process and cycles. I think that's going to be led by the technology partners out there. I think within the organization, as we accumulate more and more data and access to it becomes less cumbersome, the sophistication is going to move into the analytics realm. So you're having the right conversation at a very relevant time. To your point, traditional HR leaders probably aren't the right person to figure out what technologies we need to be implementing. That's that partnership that you need to have with people who own the insights. Again, if you don't have the luxury of coming from an organization like Matt Davide and I do, where you have them in-house, networking and you're trying to not get a mastery of it and just an understanding, those conversations will help you to define what capabilities you have with the data that you have today and what capabilities you should be building to stay competitive. I know I didn't answer your question directly, but
no, sure.
I would turn it over to one of the other guys.
Sure. Well, look, we're running out of time, guys. So for one thing I would ask before we wrap up is, for example, Davide, for you, if there's like one piece of advice you could give to HR leaders out there that are going to develop an analytics function, what would that be?
I'm just gonna repeat what Anthony said because it's the thing that I do the most, in my spare time is really look for help, because you don't need to be an expert, but you need to get the basics. And if you do get the basics right, you're gonna make a very good decision, and you're gonna set up your company for success. But if you don't get the basics right, and then the wrong person walks in the door, you have two problems. The first one is you're going to have, like a failure to deal with. But the second one is the worst one, is that as analytics leads usually are the first hires of that kind, what happens is the halo of a bad decision means that people will think that the analytics lead wasn't needed in the first place. So it's not about, oh, we got the wrong guy. As when you replace someone, nobody challenges that you don't need a CMO, right? You just, okay, we got the wrong CMO, we're going to hire another CMO. But if you hire a wrong lead and they start hiring the wrong people, it's a bad problem to deal with, right? And then the new guy comes in, there is a lot of skepticism, nobody's going to have the guy, so not good. That's why I really think what Anthony says is correct. If you feel you're good enough, do it. If you feel you're not, a second opinion is nothing to be, afraid of asking, because it's much better to have some external, points of view and save a big mistake than trying to go with pride and then, go against the wall with pride. It's not really something I would advise.
Perfect. Well, that's all for today, guys. Thank you very much, Davide. Thank you, Anthony and Matt, for sharing your knowledge and experience to our listeners. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to be back the same time next week. And as always, leave your comments in the comments section below. Let us know what topic that you'd like us to discuss next week, and we'll make sure we get the right leaders involved. Apart from that, I wish you guys all the best, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.